This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can pre-order Ravnica Allegiance at cardkingdom.com right now. Hello everyone, I'm Nitsa Hone, and it is almost time to start my Ravnica Allegiance Limited review. The full set will be spoiled tomorrow, and starting Saturday I'll be posting videos every day talking about the limited format and giving my first impressions about all the cards in it. So, as usual, I'm posting a guide to what the meaning of the letter grades in my set reviews are. If you are already familiar with my grading system and how I do things, you probably don't need to watch this again, but if you're new to the channel since the last set review, this is the video for you. Now, let's get started. So, I think the best way of illustrating my grades is by using cards from the most recent set, which is Guilds of Ravnica. So, for each of these letters, that's what we'll do. My letter grades in large part are based on how seeing a specific card in a pack or playing it in your deck makes you feel. You'll see what I mean in a moment. Let's start out at A. An A is a card that is so powerful that it has the ability to completely shift a game in your favor, even if you're behind. In other words, it's a bomb. So they are game warping, but they can also warp your draft. As if you see one, there's a very good chance that taking it and trying to get it into your deck is a good idea. You're ecstatic to have these in pack one, pick one situations, as there isn't anything better. I am pretty stingy with A's, and the vast majority of them are either rare or mythic rare, though most sets have one or two uncommons that fit into the lower range of A. So examples of A's in Guilds of Ravnica are cards like Doom Whisperer, who has insanely efficient stats and the ability to vastly improve your draws thanks to Surveil. Another A is Trostani Discordant, which not only pumps your whole board immediately, but brings 2 soldier tokens along with her. Next up is B. These are cards that actively make you feel good about having them in your deck. They're pretty powerful, but don't reach the A level of warping a game completely in your favor. These are cards that are often going to be first pickable, provided that the pack doesn't have an A in it, which is going to be most of the time. These are your highly efficient creatures and removal spells. In most sets, the majority of Bs are uncommon or rare, though usually around one common in each color usually gets into the B range. Bs are cards like Lava Coil, a highly efficient removal spell that almost always allows you to trade up, and Affectionate Indrik, a creature who functions as a removal spell and frequently gives you a 2-for-1. Next is C. My grades usually come out in a bell curve, with C being the most common grade of all. These are cards that you are neither happy nor sad to have in your deck, and the vast majority of the cards in a set fit at this level. They are filler. There is almost never a pack weak enough, pack one, pick one, where it's right to take one of these, but picking these up a little bit later is fine. They occurred all rarities, but commons most frequently end up here. Examples from Guilds of Ravnica would be Blade Instructor, a creature with decent stats and the Mentor mechanic, so it fits nicely into aggressive decks, and Spinal Centipede, who also has reasonable stats for the cost, but leaves behind a bit of value when it dies in the form of a +1/+1 counter. Next is D. These are cards that you don't feel so good about having in your deck. They usually only end up if you are short on playables because something went wrong in the draft, but they are passable if you're desperate or if you really need to fill in a specific part of your curve. In other words, these are bad, but not quite unplayable. These occurred all rarities, but once again, commons end up being here the most frequently. Some Ds from Guilds of Ravnica are Fearless Halberdier, who you only play if you're short on other 3-drops since it brings nothing else to the table but a subpar body for 3 mana, and 10th District Guard, who has an ability, but it's one that's irrelevant 99% of the time. Both of these cards were actually things that ended up sometimes in your Boros decks in Guilds of Ravnica, but that's because the deck wanted to curve out so much. But you could easily replace these with better creatures, and you would definitely, when trying to put your deck together, these are the kind of cards that get cut first. So next we have Fs. I don't give them to very many cards, but the cards that do receive them are the kind of card that you should absolutely never play. They are cards who essentially do nothing or do more harm than good for you. There are actually always a good number of rare Fs because cards of higher complexity who do some really cool stuff, but stuff that doesn't usually work out in limited, appear at this rarity. There are usually a few cards from all rarities that end up here though. Fs from Guilds of Ravnica were Unmoored Ego and Pause for Reflection. Unmoored Ego type cards show up in every set, but they are printed with Constructed in mind, where that type of effect can dismantle a problematic combo. In Limited, you're usually paying 3 mana to do nothing with it, which is actually worse than mulliganing, because at least mulliganing doesn't cost you mana. Taking out one card from your opponent's deck is just not worth 3 mana, and you don't even always get the card. This kind of card just does not pay you back for what you're doing. You can't even know if your opponent was going to draw the card you hit anyway, so that's when you're really going to be doing absolutely nothing. Pause for Reflection is a fog effect, and like cranial extraction type effects, fogs are almost always terrible and limited. They do nothing most of the time except maybe buy you a turn and you end up down a card for your efforts. If you are having to use it to survive, you're going to be dead the next turn anyway. I can't really think of any time where someone cast a fog effect on me in Limited that they didn't lose the game shortly thereafter. So these two cards should never be played in Guilds of Ravnica Limited. In addition to these more clear-cut grades, there are also two special grade categories where I provide more than one grade. The first of these categories is build-arounds. These are cards that have some particular type of synergy that can make it so that they are very strong, but if you aren't able to get the right kind of cards to complement the card, it's pretty bad, like a D or F. There are some build-arounds that have a floor of a C, but the majority have bad grades when they aren't successfully built around. Most build-arounds are uncommon rare or mythic rare. Examples from Guilds of Ravnica are Vivid Revival and Divine Visitation. For Revival, you needed to have a deck with a critical mass of gold cards, otherwise it just isn't worth playing. If you don't consistently enough have gold cards to get back with it, it's an F. But if you have lots of gold cards, it pushes all the way to the B range because of the massive card advantage it can give you. Another example is Divine Visitation, which is incredibly powerful if you have enough ways to make creature tokens, maybe even an A, but a straight dud in a deck that doesn't end up with enough ways to make creature tokens. The last category is sideboard cards. These are cards that are usually a D or F in your main board, but can provide some help out of your sideboard, and for that reason they shouldn't be treated like most Ds and Fs. Examples of this from Guilds of Ravnica are Crush Contraband and Mephitic Vapors. Both of these cards were things you could play in your main board, but they were Ds if you did that, since they aren't always going to do something, and are just bad against some opponents. There weren't enough artifacts and enchantments around in the format for Crush Contraband to be worth playing main board, but it would be nice to bring it out of the sideboard when you saw some targets for it in Game 1. Mephitic Vapors was pretty good against Boros decks, but not so good against anyone else, and as a result it was preferable to have in your sideboard and bring in against opponents playing more small creatures. Well, that does it for this video. I'm really excited to start the limited review on Saturday, and I'm excited to see the full spoiler tomorrow. Thanks for watching.